The stars shined like silver fire across the endless sky, and on a world far from Earth, there lived a people who had forgotten what time truly meant. They were called the Eternal Kin, and they carried the gift or curse of immortality. For thousands of years, their shining towers reached high above the mountains. Their cities floated on rivers of light. Their voices spoke of knowledge and memory that stretched back beyond the birth of empires. No child among them ever grew weak. No elder ever closed their eyes for the last time. Life for them was a circle without end. To the Eternal Kin, existence was not measured in years or centuries, but in patterns. A painting half-finished could wait another 100 years. A story could remain untold for 10 lifetimes. There was no need to hurry, because there was no end. They were proud of this gift, proud of being untouched by death. Yet hidden beneath their calm, there was something missing, something even they could not name. On the night when the twin moons crossed each other's light, a signal arrived. It came not from their own stars, but from a blue world spinning far away. The message was simple, yet it carried a weight the Eternal Kin had never felt before. It was a human recording, a ceremony of mourning, a funeral. The council of the Eternal Kin gathered in their great chamber, tall figures robed in silver and gold. They listened as the human voices sang. As a coffin was lowered into the ground, they saw tears fall from the eyes of children. They saw hands holding each other in grief. They heard the word goodbye, whispered again and again. The Eternal Kin shifted uneasily. What was this strange ritual? Why would a species gather to celebrate an ending? Why did their voices break with sorrow and yet carry strength? One of the elders leaned forward and asked the question that rested in all their minds. Why do they end, and why do they cry? The answer was not clear. The signal carried no explanation, only the scene itself. But among the Eternal Kin, one figure did not turn away. His name was Caliph, younger by immortal standards, yet older than all the mountains of Earth. He watched the human funeral again and again, drawn by a strange feeling in his chest. Caliph had never felt fear, never felt the cold hand of loss. But now, for the first time, he wondered what it meant to live with an ending. He wondered what it meant to hold someone close, knowing they would one day be gone. That night he stood at the highest tower of his city. Looking at the stars, his heart, if such a word could still belong to him, trembled. If they know their lives will end, he whispered to himself, then why do they love so deeply? The question refused to leave him. It wrapped around him like shadow and flame. The council dismissed the signal. They called it weakness. They called it foolishness. Why more in the ending? They said, when you can remove the end itself. But Caliph could not agree. To him, the humans did not look weak. They looked strong. Their tears were proof of something powerful. In secret, Caliph began to study the humans. He found other recordings, voices carried across the stars. He saw families laughing at a table, lovers holding hands before parting, soldiers saying farewell before battle. Always the same word returned to him. Farewell, goodbye, a word that carried more weight than any immortal promise. The more he watched, the more restless he became. His city, so full of perfection, now felt empty. The faces of his people, so calm and unchanged, now seemed hollow. They had no farewells, no tears, no final embraces. They had everything, yet they had nothing. Caliph's thoughts grew dangerous. If others learned of them, he might be silenced. But the spark had already been lit, and sparks are hard to put out. He needed answers, and he knew the only place to find them was Earth itself. So he made a choice that few immortals had ever made. He left. He traveled across the black sea of stars, his ship carrying him to the world of humans. As the blue planet grew larger in his view, Caliph's heart beat faster, not from fear of death, for he did not yet understand it, but from the weight of questions that demanded truth. When he finally set foot upon Earth, he felt something strange. The air carried scents of grass and rain. The sky held warmth and storms. Everywhere he looked, life was moving, changing, aging. He saw children running with laughter, elders sitting with tired eyes but gentle smiles. He saw the rhythm of beginnings and endings woven together. And deep within, Caliph whispered again, "What is this thing called goodbye?" Caliph walked among humans like a shadow that no one noticed. He kept his form wrapped in a cloak of light, bending eyes away from him. For days he observed them in silence, listening to their laughter, watching their grief. Each moment was fleeting, yet each moment seemed to burn with a fire that immortals had never known. He found himself drawn to the places where humans gathered in numbers, to markets full of voices, to parks where children played, to hospitals where time pressed close. The human world was alive in a way that his people had never understood. Every hour mattered. Every second was a thread in a tapestry that would one day end. Still, Caliph did not understand. Why embrace an ending? Why build knowing that everything would fall? His thoughts echoed until they spilled into action. He chose to reveal himself. It was a small village at the edge of the forest. A storm had just passed, leaving the earth soft and the sky heavy with clouds. The humans gathered around a wooden hall where light flickered and voices hushed. A man had died, and the people had come to say farewell. Caliph stepped forward, his cloak dissolving like mist. The villagers gasped, for he was tall and radiant, his eyes carrying the shimmer of unbroken centuries. Some fell to their knees. Others clutched each other in fear. "Do not be afraid," Caliph said, his voice calm. "I am not here to harm. I am here to learn." The elder of the village stepped forward, his back bent, but his eyes steady. "What do you seek, stranger who glows like the sky?" Caliph looked at the coffin before them, flowers laid across its wooden frame. "I seek to understand why you honor endings," he said. "Why do you cry and yet hold joy in your hearts?" The elder studied him, then spoke softly, "Because endings give meaning to our days. Without the end, the beginning is empty. We love because we know we cannot hold forever. We remember because memory is all that remains when a voice is gone." Caliph felt the words sink deep, like stones falling into a silent lake. The villagers did not push him away. Instead, they invited him inside. They shared food. They shared songs of remembrance. And in their grief, there was warmth. That night, Caliph sat beside a small fire with a group of children. One little girl with wide eyes asked, "Do you never say goodbye, tall one?" Caliph shook his head slowly. "In my world, there is no goodbye." The child frowned. "That sounds lonely." Her words pierced him sharper than any blade. For the first time in his endless life, Caliph realized that his people had no final embraces, no last words, no memories treasured because of their fragility. They had stretched life so far that it had lost its weight. In the days that followed, Caliph walked openly among the humans. Some were cautious, but many were curious. He listened to their stories of love and loss. He watched as parents kissed their children at night, as lovers held each other tightly before parting for war or work. Each goodbye was heavy, but each goodbye was also a promise that the moment mattered. Word of him spread, and soon humans brought him to their councils. They asked who he was, and Caliph spoke truth. He told them of the eternal kin, beings who lived forever but knew nothing of endings. He told them of the signal he had seen and of the longing it awoke in him. The human leaders did not mock him. Instead, they invited him to stay. "If you wish to understand us," one said, "then live among us. See what it means to lose and what it means to hold on even when loss comes." Caliph agreed, and for the first time, he chose not the endless halls of immortals, but the short, burning lives of humans. He built a quiet home near the village. He learned their ways. He helped them farm. He listened to their songs, and he shared the silence of their mourning. With every passing season, he felt himself pulled deeper into their rhythm. Yet questions haunted him still. What would it mean for an immortal to truly love a mortal? What would it mean to form bonds when one side would never see an end? Caliph's eyes turned to the children most often. They grew so fast, their laughter shifting into voices of responsibility, their small hands becoming strong. Every farewell between them and their parents carried a weight Caliph could not stop watching. And then one night, as the stars turned silver above the forest, Caliph whispered to himself, "Perhaps it is not death that humans fear. Perhaps it is the absence of goodbye." He did not know it then, but his life among the humans was no longer a study. It was becoming something far greater. Caliph had walked among humans for many seasons, learning their joys, their struggles, their farewells. But it was not until he met a single child that his endless existence truly began to tremble. Her name was Lyra, a little girl with hair like dark rivers and eyes that carried the glow of curiosity. She was the daughter of a farmer in the village. Her laughter seemed to chase away shadows. Her questions fell like rain, never stopping, never tiring. At first, Caliph only observed her, keeping a respectful distance. Yet Lyra was fearless. She saw him not as a stranger wrapped in mystery, but as a tall friend with stories hidden in his silence. "Why do you walk alone?" she asked him one afternoon while following him across the fields. Caliph looked down, surprised. "Because I have always walked alone," he answered. "Then you should stop," she said simply, smiling with the blunt wisdom only a child can give. From that day, she followed him often, asking about the stars, about the way his cloak shimmered, about why his eyes seemed older than the mountains. Caliph answered in pieces, careful not to overwhelm her. But the truth slipped out in fragments. He told her of immortality, of the eternal kin, of a world where no child grew old and no elder ever said farewell. Lyra frowned when she heard this. No goodbyes, no birthdays, no last hugs. That sounds empty. The word struck him harder than he expected. Empty, yes, that was what his people were, though none of them would admit it. Seasons turned, and Caliph watched Lyra grow. Her voice shifted, her height changed, her laughter softened into maturity. What was a single flicker of time for him was years for her. She carried books in her arms now, helped her family with work, and spoke of dreams beyond the village. Caliph felt something stir within him, a connection unlike any he had known. Immortals did not bond. Not in this way. They shared company, they shared memory, but never the fragile cords of love and friendship that humans wove. Yet here it was tying itself around him, pulling him close to a mortal child who was no longer quite a child. He should have stepped back, but he could not. Her presence filled the silence that had ruled his life for ages. Her questions forced him to speak truths he had buried. Her laughter made him forget, for brief moments, that he had lived 10,000 years without change. Then came the day when her smile wavered. Her steps grew heavy, and her breath carried strain. Caliph noticed it first in the way she sat quietly instead of running. The village healer whispered words that Caliph had never heard spoken so close before. Sickness. Caliph's chest tightened in a way he could not understand. He had seen humans mourn. He had seen coffins lowered, but now the shadow of farewell stretched toward him personally, and he was not ready. He sat by Lyra's side as days grew short. She tried to laugh, to speak of stars, but her strength waned. Caliph asked himself 1,000 times why such a small flame should fade so quickly, why being full of wonder should be stolen before her dreams had even begun. One night she looked at him with tired eyes. "You don't say goodbye, do you?" she whispered. Caliph shook his head, his voice breaking for the first time in eternity. "No, we never say goodbye." "Then learn," she said softly, "because one day you'll need to." Her words struck deeper than any blade. Caliph wanted to promise her that immortality would shield her, that he could stop the end, but he could not. For the first time in all his existence, he was powerless. When her last breath came, Caliph was there. The family wept, holding each other, whispering words of farewell. Caliph stood frozen, his hands trembling, his chest heavy. He felt tears rise, unfamiliar and unstoppable. They burned his eyes as they fell. It was the first time in 10,000 years that an eternal kin cried. He looked at the stillness of Lyra's form, at the silence where her voice had been, and for the first time, he understood why humans held each other so tightly, why they whispered goodbye as if it was sacred. Caliph left the house with shaking steps. The stars above seemed dimmer, the air colder. He whispered into the night, "Is this what it means to live, to love and then lose, to hold only memory?" And yet, beneath the pain, something else stirred, a fragile, sharp truth. He had not lived until this moment, not truly. Goodbye had broken him, but it had also given him meaning. The night after Lyra's passing stretched longer than any Caliph had ever known. The stars that once felt eternal now looked fragile, He sat on a hill above the village, his cloak heavy with silence. His heart carried something new, something sharp, a weight that immortality had never allowed. He replayed every moment with Lyra, her laughter, her endless questions, the way she scolded him for walking alone. Each memory pulsed with life, but each memory ended, and that ending cut him deeper than time itself ever could. The eternal kin had never known such pain. Their lives stretched without pause, untouched by sickness, unbroken by farewells. They had called this strength, yet Caliph felt now that it was emptiness disguised as perfection. When the villagers buried Lyra beneath the old tree at the edge of the fields, Caliph stood apart, watching the humans place flowers, hearing their songs of farewell. The family held one another, their tears mixing with their smiles as they spoke her name aloud. They celebrated the life she had lived, even as they grieved the life she would not. Caliph wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, tears traced his face again. Each drop was heavy. Each drop was real. For the first time in his endless years, Caliph felt the meaning of goodbye, and it broke him. That night he lifted his eyes to the sky and whispered, "Why have we hidden from this? Why have we feared endings, when endings give love its fire?" But Caliph knew he could not keep this truth to himself. It was too vast, too important. His people had lived in silence for ages, convinced that eternity was freedom. They needed to know, they needed to feel what he had felt. So he left the human village and returned to the halls of the eternal kin. His arrival drew whispers through the silver corridors. His cloak was frayed, his eyes dim with grief, and yet he carried a fire that had never been seen among his kind. The council gathered in the chamber of light, their immortal faces calm and unchanging. They looked at Caliph with curiosity. "You have walked among mortals," the elders spoke. "What have you learned from their weakness?" Caliph's voice trembled as he answered, "I have learned that it is not weakness. It is strength greater than ours. They love knowing it will end. They laugh knowing sorrow will come. They hold each other close because they cannot hold forever." Murmurs rippled through the council. Some scoffed, childish sentiment. Others dismissed him. "We do not need such frailty." But a few listened, their eyes narrowing not in disdain, but in thought. Caliph continued, "I met one of their children. She grew, she dreamed, she asked questions I had never asked in all my long years. And when she left this world, I wept. I wept as no immortal ever has. And in that moment, I knew love, I knew loss, and I knew life." The chamber fell into silence, for the eternal kin had no word for tears, no word for goodbye. They had lived in circles too wide to see their own emptiness. Caliph's grief was alien to them, yet it was undeniable. One of the younger immortals stepped forward. "And what do you suggest, Caliph, that we embrace death, that we invite endings into eternity?" Caliph lowered his head. "I suggest that without ending, eternity is hollow. We have lived forever, but we have never lived." The words struck like thunder, dividing the council. Some cried out in anger, calling him broken. Others whispered in unease, wondering if his tears carried truth. Caliph knew they would not all accept it, but he also knew the seed had been planted. For once an immortal saw grief, they could never unsee it. When he left the chamber, a few followed him in secret, asking about humans, asking about goodbyes. Caliph told them of funerals, of songs, of the way humans remembered their dead, not with silence, but with stories. He spoke of how memory was sacred because it was fragile. In the quiet that followed, Caliph felt both sorrow and hope. He had lost Lyra, but through her he had found a truth greater than eternity, a truth that could change his people forever. Yet deep inside, he also knew this was only the beginning, for once immortals began to question eternity, there could be no turning back. Caliph no longer walked alone in the halls of the eternal kin. Shadows followed him, not with hostility, but with curiosity. Whispers carried his name from tower to tower. Some called him broken, some called him dangerous. Yet others leaned closer, desperate to hear more about the strange fire he carried within his heart. He began to meet them in secret, in hidden gardens and quiet chambers, Immortals who had once been content with endless repetition now gathered around him. Their eyes searched his face for answers. "What is it like to feel goodbye?" one asked. "What is it like to lose and yet to love still?" Caliph told them of Lyra, of her laughter, her questions, and the way she had looked at him with tired eyes and said, "Learn to say goodbye." He told them how her absence hurt, but how that very hurt gave her memory weight. He spoke of tears not as weakness, but as proof that life had touched the heart. At first they struggled to understand, for immortals had no frame for endings. Their minds rejected the idea that something could vanish forever. But Caliph's words lingered, his voice shook with truth, his tears glimmered in the starlight. And slowly, doubts began to grow. He brought them more than words. He brought recordings of humans. He showed them families gathered at funerals, singing songs of farewell. He played them voices whispering goodbyes before battle. He let them see children running into their parents' arms after long partings. Every moment was fleeting, yet every moment shone brighter, because it was fragile. Some immortals turned away, unable to bear it. "Why should we envy their suffering?" they said. "We are above such weakness." But others stayed, eyes wet with emotions they could not name. For the first time in their endless lives, they felt something stir in the silence of their hearts. One night Caliph led a small group of them to Earth itself. They cloaked their presence and walked among humans, watching as lives began and ended all around them. They saw joy in weddings, sorrow in funerals, laughter in children's games, and the quiet strength in partings. A few of the immortals wept openly, their tears falling on soil that had never known such drops from their kind. When they returned, Caliph began to teach openly. He stood in the great square of his city and spoke to anyone who would listen. "We have lived without meaning," he said. "We have feared the end so deeply that we have never tasted life. The humans have shown me that to say goodbye is to love, and to love is to live." The city was divided. Some accused him of spreading corruption. Others fell silent, trembling with thoughts they could not voice. A few approached him after his speeches, asking him to show them more, asking to hear the songs of humans again. Caliph gathered them in circles. He taught them to speak the word goodbye, a word that had no place in their language. At first it felt heavy on their tongues, but soon it became sacred. He encouraged them to tell stories of moments they feared to lose. He told them to imagine endings, and to hold each imagined farewell like a jewel. The eternal kin who learned these lessons began to change. They smiled differently. They looked at one another not with the cold certainty of forever, but with the warmth of the moment that mattered. They began to treasure their meetings, their conversations, as if they might not last. But change never comes without conflict. The High Council grew restless. They saw Caliph as a threat to their perfect circle. "He teaches poison," they declared. "He would bring death into eternity." Their voices thundered across the towers, calling for his silence. Yet the fire had already spread. In hidden places, immortals whispered goodbye to each other as practice. In quiet moments, they imagined the grief Caliph had described. And though it hurt, it also made them feel alive. Caliph knew the battle was not yet won. He could see the storm building. The eternal kin would not accept this lesson easily. But he also knew there was no turning back. The seed had been planted in their eternal hearts, and no force of silence could stop it from growing. One night, as Caliph stood once more beneath the stars, he thought of Lyra's words. He whispered softly, "I have begun, little one. I have begun to teach them goodbye." And in that moment, he knew her memory was no longer just his. It was becoming the spark that would change an immortal race forever. The words of Caliph spread like cracks in crystal, small at first, but widening until the whole of the eternal kin could feel the pressure. Some embraced his lesson, whispering goodbyes in secret, holding memories as treasures instead of endless cycles. Others burned with fury, their voices echoing through the silver halls. "He is bringing death into our eternity," they cried. The council grew divided. The high elder stood tall, his voice sharp as glass. "We are perfection, untouched by weakness, untouched by end. Why should we lower ourselves to the level of mortals?" But another elder rose, her eyes heavy with thought. Perhaps perfection is emptiness. Perhaps forever has blinded us. The chamber erupted. Some shouted for Calith's exile. Others demanded to hear more. Never before had the eternal kin been so split. For ages they had moved as one, unchanging, unquestioning. Now doubt had torn them apart. Calith walked among both sides. He did not hide. His voice carried openly across the city squares. "I do not bring you death," he said. "I bring you meaning. Without the end, you have never begun. Without goodbye, you have never loved." His words shook those who listened, yet angered those who refused. Soon, the divide reached beyond words. The eternal kin began forming groups. The silent ones, who clung to eternity, declared Calith a corrupter. They destroyed the circles where his followers gathered. They swore never to speak the word goodbye. They marched through the towers chanting, "Forever, forever." But Calith's followers, calling themselves the Rememberers, stood their ground. They lit small fires in the night, gathering to speak aloud the names of humans they had watched, repeating stories of love and loss. They wept openly, and in their tears they felt strength. They whispered to one another, "We have lived longer than stars, but now we have begun to live." The humans who still welcomed Calith became caught in the storm. Some immortals accused them of poisoning eternity. Some demanded their removal from immortal lands. Yet other immortals sought the humans in secret, begging to understand their ways, asking to stand in funerals, to hold hands in grief, to whisper farewell. Calith knew the conflict could not be silenced. The eternal kin had lived too long in stillness. Now they had tasted fire, and the fire demanded change. One evening, as the twin moons crossed in the sky, the council held a gathering larger than any before. Immortals filled the great square, their voices rising like thunder. On one side the silent ones stood, shining in unbroken calm. On the other stood the Rememberers, their eyes bright with tears. Calith stepped forward between them, his voice carrying across the endless hall. "We are at a choice," he said. "We may cling to eternity, safe but empty, or we may embrace the human lesson, fragile but full of life. The humans have shown us strength not in forever, but in farewell. They have shown us that love matters because it ends. They have shown us that memory is precious because it fades." The silent ones roared back. Weakness, corruption, blasphemy. Their voices shook the pillars. "We will not allow death to taint us." The Rememberers cried in answer. "Life without end is no life at all. Forever is not meaning. Forever is silence." The city trembled with their shouts. A race that had never known war now stood on the edge of it. Not for land, not for power, but for the meaning of life itself. Calith stood in the center, his cloak stirring in the wind. He knew he had awakened something that could never be undone. The eternal kin had seen the truth of humanity, and truth could not be buried. Yet he also knew the cost. Families of immortals were tearing apart. Friends who had walked together for millennia now turned against one another. The fire of goodbye had brought meaning, but it had also brought conflict. That night, Calith stood once more beneath the stars and whispered, "This is the divide. Some will choose silence, some will choose life, but one day, even the most stubborn will see that forever without farewell is not forever at all." And in the quiet of the night, he felt the weight of what was to come. For the eternal kin had reached the edge of a decision that would change their eternity forever. The eternal kin had never known war, yet their cities now burned with division. The silent ones stood tall, unshaken in their vow of eternity, while the Rememberers wept and whispered the human word goodbye. The once perfect harmony of immortals had shattered, and Calith stood at the center of the storm. He knew the council could not hold this divide forever. A choice had to be made. Either the eternal kin would cling to the emptiness of endless life, or they would step into the fragile light of meaning that humanity had shown them. The council summoned Calith once more. Their voices were thunder. "You have infected us with weakness," said the High Elder. "You have turned our people against themselves." But Calith did not bow. His voice was steady. "I have given you truth. You fear the end so much that you never began. Humanity has lived fewer centuries than the dust beneath our feet, yet they have found strength we cannot touch. They love, they grieve, they remember, and in their goodbyes, they are greater than us. The council could not silence him, for too many immortals had heard his words, too many had wept, too many had begun to treasure moments as if they could slip away. The silence of eternity had cracked, and through it life was pouring in. Caliph made his choice before all of them. "I will take mortality," he said. The chamber gasped. Immortals stepped back as if struck. "I will give up eternity. I will live, and I will die. And when my last breath leaves me, I will speak the word goodbye, for in that goodbye I will know that I have loved and I have lived." The decision rippled like fire through the eternal kin. Some screamed that he had betrayed their very nature. Others fell to their knees, trembling, for his courage awakened something in them they had buried for millennia. The humans who had come to witness stood silent, their eyes wet with tears. They knew the weight of the choice. They knew what it meant to embrace an ending. Caliph stepped into the chamber of binding, a place where immortality was woven into their being. With a single act, he severed the thread that had tied him to forever. His body trembled. His face aged. Lines touched his skin. His hair dimmed. For the first time in 10,000 years, Caliph felt the passage of time press upon him. The immortals gasped, watching as one of their own bent beneath the weight of years. Yet in his eyes there was no fear, only peace. He lived among them for decades, walking slower, speaking softer, but smiling more than he ever had before. He shared meals with humans, laughed with their children, mourned at their funerals. His tears flowed freely, but each one was a jewel. And then came the day when his breath grew shallow. He lay upon a bed surrounded by both humans and immortals. The silent ones stood apart, silent still, but their eyes could not turn away. The rememberers leaned close, tears on their faces. Caliph smiled faintly. "I have lived," he whispered. His eyes moved to the sky beyond the window, stars shining in the dark. "I have loved, I have lost, and now I say goodbye." His final breath left him, and silence fell. But in that silence there was no emptiness. There was weight. There was meaning. The rememberers wept, their voices trembling. "Goodbye, Caliph, goodbye." And for the first time in the history of the eternal kin, the word echoed through their halls. The silent ones could not deny the power of what they had witnessed. They had seen one of their own choose an end. And in that end, they saw more life than in all their endless centuries. Seeds of doubt grew in them, small but unstoppable. From that day, the eternal kin were never the same. Some still clung to silence, but many began to whisper goodbye. They began to see each moment not as a drop in an endless sea, but as a flame that burned brighter because it would fade. Caliph's memory lived on. Humans spoke his name in their stories, and immortals carved his words into their halls. To say goodbye is to know love. To know love is to live. And so it was said through the stars. They had lived forever, untouched by death, yet only humans had taught them the meaning of goodbye.